Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual roundtable today for senior housing professionals. My name is Spencer Giese. I'm a research education specialist at ACUI, and I'll be serving as your technical director for today's roundtable. Certainly, before we get started, I want to again share with you the many resources that ACUI continues to provide to you all, whether those are recordings of our virtual roundtables, threads in our online community, our dedicated COVID-19 resources. These are all able to be brought to you because of your membership dollars. So thank you for your continued support of ACUI. We have an outstanding panel for you today of senior housing officers who provide a variety of perspectives to this conversation. But before I pass this over to our moderator, a few quick housekeeping points. Our roundtables are meant to be conversational. So this is not your typical webinar where you would just sit and unengage. Instead, we'd like you to use that Q&A function to be submitting questions because you have an opportunity to be a part of this webinar. So look for that Q&A button. We also have the chat function in this Zoom session. Just to make sure that you're seeing people on camera, you're seeing our PowerPoint deck, if you could just hit the raised hand function now for me, just to show that those are coming through on your end. Excellent. Glad to see those hands raised. Outstanding. So without further ado, you've gotten our overview of the session. Let's get into it. We've got, time's of the essence. Let's work with our panel and our moderator, Chris Silva. So Chris, I'd like to pass it over to you.
Spencer, thank you very much, and thank you for all the support that you've done to bring us here, as well as Holly Stapleton from ACUI Central Office. As Spencer said, my name is Christopher Silva. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the Director of Housing at American University. I also serve as the chair of the Future Housing Work Group for ACUI. I want to thank you again for taking the time from your busy schedule to attend today's roundtable. Our topics are about opening and about what's happening across campuses and how our colleagues from different universities are managing and learning and supporting their students, their staff through these say, challenging times. While some campuses have already completed their move-in processes and classes are already happening, already started, some other campuses are still perhaps executing their move-in right now as we have this call. And also some other campuses have had to perhaps delay their opening or pivot their operations to an all-online semester due to whether health and safety considerations, as well as environmental issues, perhaps such as a hurricane. The news stories from this past week, as I'm sure many of you are familiar, have focused on how schools are managing the increased number of COVID-19 cases on their campuses. And in some situations, the perceived missteps on how they've supported their students, how they are supporting their students in their quarantine and isolation spaces. Those stories have also focused on ongoing concerns around workplace safety, especially for student staff, as well as accountability measures, right, applied to our students, applied to our residents, with some schools suspending and in some cases even evicting students. Many of the stories that we've been following, as well as experiences, are being told through the eyes of the students themselves, sometimes through many social media platforms. And so given this reality, which may be familiar to you on this roundtable, I want to invite our panelists who represent different institutions to introduce themselves and then share brief remarks about their reopening statuses, what were their plans and how they're working right now. And then after these remarks, we're going to move on to the discussion and Q&A. And before I begin, I do want to just make one quick note. Coincidentally, we have 3 colleagues on this call, panelists, that were part of the same NHTI session 10 years ago. That's myself, Stephen, and Crystal. And I also saw Olin Garrett on the call, who was our colleague managing the housing and other resources at NHTI 10 years ago, the last session at the University of Maryland. So just wanted to give a shout out to all the NHTA colleagues on this call. So as we move on to our panelists today, we'll begin with our colleague, Alan. And please know that Alan is going to need to depart early from the roundtable, and in advance, I already thank him for his kind participation to this roundtable. So please, Alan.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. Welcome, colleagues. If you don't know, we started and then stopped. And if you've been watching any of the news or any of the morning shows or reading any of the papers, I think our story's been pretty well told from that perspective. And Chris, I couldn't agree more that this story is being told in so many ways, both accurately and inaccurately. So I think we had a really solid plan for where we thought the disease, the pandemic, would be come August 10th. And I think part of the problem is it wasn't quite there yet. And so through a number of twists and turns, we opened, like many of you, with socially distanced openings, with appointments, those kind of things. And that went exceedingly well. And then we got into the first week of traditional classes. Our classes, about 50% of the classes were online, but about 70% of the seats were online. So we were mostly online from the beginning, from an academic perspective. And as I've been telling the story to friends and colleagues, I think for us, it was first-year students meet fraternities. And that was where some of our issues came from. But again, I think it was also just that the disease was just at a very different place than we had hoped and thought it would be. And with all the great epidemiologists and world-class researchers we have on this campus, it just wasn't quite there. So we made a pivot to online classes and then began to close the residence halls to the point where yesterday was the last day for students to either cancel or submit a hardship waiver. We have about 1,000 students with hardship, which sounds like a lot. The trouble is our capacity is 10,000. So we are, we're at about 10 to 11%, still trying to figure out what to do with student staff, trying to keep their morale and safety top of mind along with our housekeepers and our live-in staff. So that's kind of our story to this point.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. And I appreciate you sharing those details with us. And I'll ask our colleague Kawana to introduce herself and talk about her campus.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kawana Leggett, and I'm the Interim Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean of Students at Washington University in St. Louis. I also serve as on the Executive Board of ACUI as the Workforce Development Director. At Washington University, we are in a different situation where back in May, we made the decision to adjust our academic calendar and begin courses about 3 weeks delayed. And so we were supposed to open up about 2 weeks ago. And so our classes won't start until September 14th. And one of the reasons was to kind of see what the higher education landscape would look like. And certainly we've gotten to see everything. I think I get a new story every day about things that are going on. We are feverishly planning, and all of the things that Alan outlined, the planning of the move-in, the social distancing, we've de-densified our residence halls. And we made our announcement pretty late in terms of what we were doing. The chancellor announced July 31st, the de-densification of our residence hall. So we had to redo all of our housing assignments and go to single room occupancy. We have a number of behavioral modifications that we've put in place that I'll speak to later in the conversation. So the framework is there. We are testing only our residential students, and we have a plan for that. come in, test, and then they move in. So the framework is there, but as we've seen, we need all of our community members to adhere to those good standards of wearing masks, keeping social distance, keeping the events down and the size down. So, we are, waiting to see what our students will do once they arrive. But the framework and the planning processes have been in place. And I feel good that we have everything outlined, but we have a number of things that we just can't control once we open.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jackie Satera. I serve as the Director for Residential Education at Bucknell University. I use she, her, hers pronouns. So we are open. We are in our third week of, or just going into, I guess, our third week of classes. So we opened over a 5-day period earlier in August. So we also had appointments. We had approximately, I would say, 130 students move in every 2 hours. We started as early as 7 a.m. and we went to 9 p.m. with those appointment times. And we, as far as testing goes, we pre-tested our students. So we did that through mail. They had to take 2 tests with the kits that they received before they returned to campus. And then we also provided on-site testing for students in case they didn't get their kit or there were some situations with the mail tests. And so that was pretty much an overview of our opening. And I will also, when Stephen introduces himself, he'll share a little bit more about our logistics for that.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm Stephen Appinell, he, him, his, and I'm the Director of Housing Services at Bucknell University. For the testing that Jackie talked about, in order for students to move in, they had to show us 2 negative tests before they were actually able to get a room key. We are at about 94% occupancy when typically we're around 99 to sometimes over 100 occupancy. So as far as students being on campus, we are very successful. Some of the things we did, we have no quads, we have no triples. And one of our buildings, which had a high student to bathroom ratio, we reduced from a 19:1 to about a 12 to 13:1 by being able to reduce the capacity of that building by 80 people based on students saying that they wanted to learn remotely. So we've tried to create distance between people as much as we can, and we are going to continue to test throughout the semester. Students have to test every 10 to 14 days, as well as faculty and staff. And as we get into those results of tests, we then have a contact tracing team, which does quarantining and isolating of students, where Jackie and I play a fairly large role as far as determining where they go, meal delivery, getting their mail packages, making sure they're at the hotel with internet access, and all of the logistical details that come with it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal. We are in our first week of courses. We had our students move in. We went from a 4-day period to a 9-day period. What we found is parents really enjoyed that. It was not crowded. I think there were some lull periods with the pacing that took place, but I think it worked out pretty well. With about 6,500 move-ins, we had 3 aggressive family members, which is actually pretty good odds, we think, when we think about social distancing and the mask piece. We also tested our first-year students. We also tested our live-in faculty and staff as a part of our process. And as many of you are probably doing, we had extensive FAQs online, lots of town halls, lots of phone station setups prior to folks arriving to campus to help mitigate some of these pieces. For the folks who pre-tested, we did offer a $100 incentive if they brought their tests and they were valid within 5 days, so that helped. We've pulled 2 halls offline to be isolation spaces as needed. And thankfully, we've had about half as many positive numbers coming to campus than we anticipated, so that's good. I'll also add, I think one piece that also helped us, in addition to appointments, we actually had students drop off things prior, so they could sign up, and 2 weeks prior to moving, they could put things in their room, and so that reduced some of the traffic as well when they came to campus.
Well, thank you very much for explaining about your campus operations and the highlights of how you're preparing or how you've prepared and what has happened. And so I wanted to come back to Stephen, Jackie, and Crystal, and Alan as well. What, in terms of when you think about your move-in efforts, the complexity of it, right? There's so many parts, so many pieces of it. But what were the most complex pieces of this, and how did you ensure their success? I would ask Stephen and Jackie perhaps to start.
I think for us, it was the massive amount that we were doing through one day, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. for 5 days straight. Of course, we're there an hour earlier and there an hour later. So they were 15, 20-hour days in those 5 days. So it became pretty exhausting. And trying to work with families and students on the spot. Maybe they didn't have 2 tests. They had to wait. Working with the families and getting move-in and so on. It was a complete role reversal for me because I'm used to move-in, walking halls, introducing myself to people. I was not able to do that. I was handing out keys. We did not have student assistants or RAs assisting at this part of move-in at the time. So it was legitimately one spot the whole time where I couldn't be the PR person and really getting to know families and students at that level. It was more of a hand in your key, hand them their key, make sure your mask is up, get 6 feet apart, please, type of role, which was a little bit different. And also we're getting better at it, but I feel trying to pivot as much as best we can. When a change occurs and then we have to pivot, sometimes it's hard to take, especially if it's a surprise to a family. So one of our challenges was rapid testing was not something we were accepting at the university. And some people had brought results for rapid testing ready to move in, and they had to wait to do our test on site because our health professionals determined that rapid testing was not going to be accepted based on how it was conducted and the result and the way they would get results. So I think for me on the housing side and what I've seen, those were some challenges that we experienced.
I can also add, I think, so our move-in, it was a university wide event for us, which is normally not a thing. So we had colleagues from all different offices and departments really lend a helping hand and volunteer for different shifts throughout the day. And so that was really helpful because we had different stations. So, they had to show that they had their 2 negative tests before they could get to the next point and so on and so forth. And the last point was kind of getting their key. And we also offered some goodies for students as they arrived. Each student got kind of like a care package with a wellness kit in it. So they could take their temperature daily, some Bucknell branded face masks, and a chair so they can sit outside, whether just to be social or for classes that are going to be held outside. So that was kind of like the end point for them. But what was helpful, I think, when families or students were, because it wasn't necessarily the experience that they were going to encounter, that it was unexpected when they arrived. Our university advancement folks were there, and they were really able to engage with parents and like answer their questions and provide just resources and support in different ways, I think, than other colleagues across the campus could have done. So that was something that was really, really helpful. We had a tent. It was kind of like the parent, family, friends tent. So as they were waiting, we did not allow anybody to go through the move-in stations with a student. So it was only the student that could go through. So we had kind of a holding place for everybody else under that tent, and we offered water to folks, and we that was really helpful for that.
I guess I'll just jump in and I'll echo something that Crystal said. Our staff and families really liked the extended move-in. The pace was very, normally we move 10,000 people in 5 days. And so to do that to do 4,000, because we de-densified before we opened, so only to do 4,000 in 9 days was a treat in some ways. The only thing that was really markedly different was it was between plexiglasses. We were handing a key over. We did use our student staff in that capacity. That people could only bring 3, visitors with them or helpers with them. And what was really missing was the energy. I mean, all of our returning RAs was like, where was the spirit? Where was the welcome? And that was really hard to do in such. I walked around with the chancellor, and he was hoping to greet families and do all that, and there was nobody in line. There was nobody. And he's like, well, I guess it's working, but I got no one to talk to. And I'm sorry. And so, I think we're going to learn some things, kind of lessons learned that we'll implement in the future. If we're looking for kind of silver linings to some of this, I think there are some things we'll take away that will make our move in better in the future. But move-in was the best part of this whole thing for us, because it really went just like we drew it up.
Yeah, I would echo what Alan shared. The energy level was pretty low. And so if you are able to add any entertainment, we had our mascot, and he's always great. But it just felt anticlimactic for these students who, did not have a prom and they're starting their first year of school. And it was pretty low energy because of the length of time that we extended move-in to be. I would also share, we had to find a module with the vendor to go ahead and implement move-in appointments. That wasn't something we had to do before. So finding something that worked and worked with our budget was something that came up for us. I think the other thing, the complexity is, mitigating staff fear as much as possible. And the enforcement piece, right? It's like, okay, if this person gets too close to me, can I call the police, right? And we can't call the police to make someone put a mask on. So I think there are just these pieces of, do you care about us? Are we valued? Because move-in is a pretty intimate process with regards to proximity to, other folks. And I think the other thing we came across was a constant changing information on U.S. versus out-of-state versus international, the hotspots. Do you isolate them? Do you not? It felt like the information was constantly changing. And so trying to make sure we can accommodate all our students and provide the best experience possible was tough at times. I think, we also had, you could have 2 guests with you, but one in the hall at one time for 2 hours. And so, it was really sad. There were a lot more tears this year as parents realized, oh, wait, I can't come visit my kiddo in their room again until the end of the year. So just preparing yourself for those emotions is probably a piece of advice as well.
Thank you. And I wonder, Kawana, because your move-in hasn't happened yet, right? It's because of the kind of a delayed reopening from a traditional timeline. And so have you, and hopefully maybe there's other colleagues out there too in the same scenario, have you changed pieces of your process in the last few weeks based on what's happening across different campuses? And are you even looking to do other changes, perhaps from listening to some of the pieces shared here?
Yeah, well, it makes me feel a little good about our plan because we've implemented a number of the things that they've spoke about. We start this weekend with our international students arriving, and that will be our first wave that happens Saturday and Sunday. And then our RAs actually arrive on Monday, which is a big group. And then we just begin our whole weeks of move-in. We're having first-year students actually move in over Labor Day, and then our returning students will come the next week. And so we've spread it out similar. We also have the 2 person rule for guests, and they have to be out by 7 p.m. And so the thing that I believe Crystal said, there's constant changing. So we're working with occupational health, our Washington University Med School, and our Health and Wellness Center to stand up testing. And so all of our students will come in, they will get a complimentary COVID kit that folks explained that has all the nice COVID complimentary things that you can put together in a box. We also will have the test site, and then they'll get their key. And that's actually off-site, off-campus, and then they will come to campus. They'll have a wristband indicating that they have been tested. all of our doctors have said as long as our students have their mask on and keep social distance, they will be able to move in. We know that they won't get their test results between 4 hours and 24 hours. And so the thing that they can do is really move in, grab and go get their food, and then go into their rooms until they get their test results. We are working with Habit for Health and Wellness, our center, to alert through emailing negative tests. And then when those positive tests come in, which we know, and that's the thing that has guided us, is that we know that during testing, there will be a positive test. And so we will trigger our isolation and quarantine housing process. And so just looking at all the things that have happened across the country, we've really looked at how we can increase our portfolio for quarantine and isolation housing. We've actually taken a 400-bed facility offline and contracted with a hotel to put students in so that we could use a residential facility for quarantine and isolation. So the testing that has been going on across the country has led us to increase our bed counts, because that we know that we're going to just have more students that come in already through the testing. So, we've been paying attention and we have the framework. It's just really about whether or not folks will follow the guidelines. And we believe that the behavior modification work is the most important as we move through this.
Thank you, Kawana. And so as we were hearing some of the pieces that Kawana is planning to execute, and the colleagues that have already had move-in happen, is there anything that you wish you and your teams had done different? Perhaps something you didn't anticipate and you would have thought better, or you would have trained better, you would have spent more time, more hours on a different aspect? Perhaps you can share one from each institution.
Sure, if you don't mind, I'll go first, because as we said, I have to jump off. The other unfortunate reality of the other side of this is I need to go to a budget hearing and try and figure out what we're going to do with a $44 million deficit. So if anybody else wants to come, I'll share the Zoom call and you can join me. No takers, okay. But one thing I wish, and this goes back to staff training, our staff have been amazing, student staff and professional staff, but I don't think you can spend enough time talking about these really difficult conversations with people who have all kinds of different reasons that they either want everyone to be wearing a mask and living by a very strict code, or on the other side of the equation, who think this whole thing is hogwash and they just really don't want to wear a mask. We had very few encounters at opening, as Crystal had talked about. But then once parents left, once we got into kind of the throes of things, daytime behavior was spectacular. Walking around campus, everybody's masked up, everybody's good to go. You get into the evening hours, and that's where we started to see our traditional problems exacerbated by our COVID-related ones. And I don't know what I would do differently, other than I don't think you can spend enough time preparing staff for what that's going to be like, and the pushback that they're going to get, and the volume that they're going to see. We had no visitation, we did all those kinds of things. And so what do you do when you walk in and not only are they not wearing masks, none of those are alcohol, but they're also having to confront the fact that there is now a COVID violation, which very well, we evicted about, before we shut down, about 48 students for COVID-related transgressions. And so, there was all kinds of angst around that. So I would just suggest making sure that your staff is kind of keenly aware and keenly prepared for that. And colleagues, I've got to go, but I can't promise I'll email you back right away, but my email address is part of all the communication. I'll try and shoot you as many answers as we can. Thank you.
I think something that a do-over, one of the questions that we continue to ask each other in planning was, what is the student experience for the fall? Why should you live with us? And we talked about that, but I don't know if we communicated that with families as much as I would have liked. Maybe old school, here's a piece of paper of all the events you can do, because the continual question we keep getting since folks drop their students off is, what is there for my person to do? They're isolated, they're alone, things are different. And so that would be my recommendation, is to, be as explicit, and over communicate all of the options that students will have, because it just feels a little bit different this year, right? And it is.
One thing that I keep on hearing my staff say, which I'm guessing they're hearing from students and families, is you keep on telling us everything that we can't do. What can we do? And so I think if we were to kind of start over or think differently, I think thinking with that framework is really important. So yes, we know these are all the things that we can't do, but let's be proactive and make a campaign or make flyers or put in RE training or whatever it may be, all of the things that folks can do and how we can engage that way. So I don't think we were thinking from that framework initially, but now it's coming up. And so we're kind of backtracking and getting some more of that communication out to folks.
All right. Well, Alan started talking about this and the concept of talking to staff and explaining to staff what the realities were going to be. And some of the pieces that we've seen, and I think it's connected also with what you said, Crystal and Jackie, about what students can do and what they are doing, some positive behaviors. What we've seen in the news is unfortunately also big concerns about the compliance around COVID-19 protocols, and even some of the large-scale impact that may be associated with. And so this idea of compliance around the protocols, I know it's something that colleagues are working through and having to manage. Usually we already have to do that, but even more now. And so, we know that students were informed and had received information about their need and their part on being accountable for their behavior and how that contributes to the community via different ways, right? Via pledges and via training, community standards, very specific in several campuses. And so what are you seeing, on your campus right now? Are you optimistic that this, the policies and the processes that students are following is going to work? Are you nervous about students' ability to comply? Not just now in the week of perhaps the beginning of the semester, but through all the semester. And then, perhaps you can also share a little bit about how, if it is working, if you're hopeful about how perhaps some of the tips on how you've made that work.
Well, I'm at the edge of my seat to listen and learn from this. I will say from our perspective, as we are at I don't know if it's a disadvantage or an advantage, our students are all seeing what's happening. And so when we message them, we are very clear that we are doing this WashU pledge to ensure that we are not one of the communities that you hear about on the news. So we'll have the WashU pledge that they have to sign. We also have an educational module through our health and wellness. We've changed some of the housing contract language. We're putting all the places where we have touch points, video campaigns, and so doing all the things that you do when you're trying to get people to adhere to the policies. We're going to be very clear that if there are egregious behavior, temporary suspension, expulsion, removal from residence, all on the table. I will say that the more stories that come out, the more we're getting tips from folks saying, I know this student is coming and they're about to plan a party. could you investigate that? So, you know, it's been helpful in a way to help folks know that it's okay to report because anything that jeopardizes public health may shut down our university. The other piece I will say is that we made a very significant policy change at our campus where first year students and sophomores were guaranteed housing, but for our juniors and seniors, even those that had housing contract, we basically said we can't guarantee housing. And we did that because we were trying to get all single room occupancy. And what that did is actually force our juniors and seniors to move off campus. And so our off-campus properties are now more saturated with undergraduate students. And while we still have student conduct jurisdiction to hold them accountable, we know that we need to work with our neighboring jurisdictions to really respond to any incidents that come on. So that's a policy change that, you know, we probably will look back on and say maybe that wasn't the best because all we did was force folks out, but we're hopeful that we've been very diligent with our police department and our folks about calling us first so that we could be the ones that are monitoring and supporting our students when things like this come up.
So I will share that, you know, we really have worked with our staff and faculty to say it's important to model social distancing and facial masks or physical distancing because, you know, students are going to look to them. So we've really tried to instill that into all of the folks here on our campus. We also have talked about how we want to take an educational approach because this is a culture shift. We're asking 35,000 people to do something differently all at once. And so with the educational approach, we've said, okay, that first time that you are seen without a mask or it's shared, it's going to be, hey, did you forget your mask? Let me give you one, right? Educational. That second time we will document folks, you know, in our incident database and do some reminders. And then after that, it could ramp up to you are no longer living with us because this is really about thinking about the community and the impact. Because we do have our, you know, for instance, our cleaning staff who are scared, they're worried, folks are nervous. And so how do we make sure that we are, you know, abiding by this public health policies that we have? So I think it's the educational piece, certainly. What we're seeing on our campus is students are falling into a couple of camps. Either it's, I am socially distanced, this is good, but they don't want to wear a mask, or I have a mask and I'm not going to social distance. And we need them to do both. So that's what we are seeing, you know, and I think with the folks who are feeling isolated, some folks are going to parties off campus, you know, and so it's reminding them no more than 10 people in a house, do not go. And so we are continuing with that line of messaging.
Go ahead, Stephen, you can start.
Okay. So somebody had put in a question about how to address off-campus parties. So what we do at Bucknell is we have about 240 students who live off campus, and we've built a really good relationship with our town and our chief of police in town. So they share with us anytime a student or students are involved in any type of infraction. And we also support the town when they have ordinances or policies. For example, there's no large gatherings. Normally a large gathering of 25 or more, you have to register for it and so on, but the town across the board is not allowing that. And that goes for everybody. So there was some feedback, students didn't like it, but the town also was upset because that involves like weddings and other events as well, where they can't have it, but it was a public health thing. So if it does occur off campus, it is brought to our attention, and then we address it as part of our community responsibility agreement, which is what our form is called, for students to fill out saying they're gonna respect and abide by these other elements in keeping everybody as safe as we possibly can. And then for students on campus, we do have a process within our conduct system that Jackie's a little bit more involved in. So I'm gonna actually pass the baton to her to help out with that one.
So yeah, it starts with this waiver that Stephen mentioned. And also in addition to that, we have the videos similar to what Crystal shared. So we're just kind of trying to keep on re-educating every opportunity that we get and really trying to hit home to everybody that it's everybody's responsibility to do the reminding and the educational piece. So whether it's peer-to-peer because you're walking across campus, or it's a faculty or staff member that's walking across the quad that sees somebody without a face covering, or social distancing, that it's your responsibility to say something in the moment to those students. So what's happening is that, of course, people have different comfort levels with confronting, right? And so I think that if we backtracked, that maybe, you know, some training to the university community about confronting and confrontation, you know, us housing and res life folks, it's definitely in our wheelhouse, but to other folks within the university, it's not, and that's real. So that would maybe be a lesson learned. But moving forward, as far as the conduct goes, if it's COVID related, our conduct system, we have set times throughout the week where conduct cases, they're going to be via Zoom. And so there's videos. We have recorded videos that for a first time offense, they will be sitting together in a Zoom watching these videos, and then there's a conversation that's happening along with that. And so that's kind of first offense. And then if it continues to happen, it will go up. So we're not jumping right to suspension or anything. It will kind of be a process to get there. So we're in week 3. We have had some gatherings in residence hall rooms with people not wearing face coverings, and with the space of the room, it's sometimes hard to social distance in there. And so hopefully, you know, that will stop. But at the end of the day, they're college students. And so, you know, and the first years really want that college experience. So I think it does come back to educating, just reiterating, and really taking the time, you know, for our live-in staff, specifically as they continue to try to build community during this time, to have those conversations outside of conduct. I think that that's important.
The one thing I did want to address in one of the questions were the medical amnesty approach. This has come up in our conversations, particularly around large events. You know, who is to be held accountable? Is it the host, or is it everyone that attended the party? One of the things that our doctors have been very clear on, yes, we should hold our students accountable, but we should also give parameters around providing support so that they can go through the contact tracing piece of this. And so it's important that, yes, the accountability is there, but first and foremost, we've got to prioritize that health and safety. And as our contact tracers are trying to understand and identify who was at the event, it's important that people are open and honest too. So, you know, medical amnesty has been discussed, but we've also discussed that certainly whoever is hosting a large event would be held accountable regardless of the contact tracing and amnesty policies in place.
Thank you, Kawana, and thank you for sharing that. It seems that we have right there are several pieces to the health and safety and the maintenance of the community, of the individual responsibility, of course, the face covering, the distancing, and then the piece of what's happening off campus outside of our control, but still in some involvement, right? Social events, fraternity sorority events, everything, etc., on parties off campus. But there's also one other piece here that was asked in the Q&A that is a key mark, it's about the students' ability to follow detailed quarantine and isolation protocols. How has that worked on your campus? And are there any lessons learned from those experiences?
I can tackle this first. So a couple things that we have implemented. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, but try not to talk too much. So one thing that we have implemented that we found to be really helpful is we have an isolation team, and that encompasses quarantine as well. And since we've opened, we meet daily, sometimes even more than once a day. And we have found that to be really, really helpful, because every situation that arises is different, no matter what that number might look like. And so for all of the folks to be on the same page has been really helpful. And that includes our student health, folks from housing, folks from the res ed side, also our contact tracers. So we have hired Bucknell, well, Bucknell employees are doing the contact tracing. So it's all happening within the university. And so for all of those people to come together to talk has been really, really helpful. So with our students that are in quarantine, they are really struggling with, they want to go outside. They've been in, right, like it's day maybe 4 or 7, and they're really struggling that they can't go outside. They want fresh air. Some different type of, mental health situations are starting to arise. They're being really vocal about it. And our director for our Counseling and Student Development Center, she also is a part of our team, and she gave some really great advice, suggestions, some thoughts. And so she said she had engaged in some conversations with some students and really led with thanking the students for staying in their room and for doing their part, and for helping to keep our campus safe and helping to mitigate the virus. And so I thought that was really fantastic, just like her perspective of that and what she shared. I'm happy to share some language with folks if you want to reach out. We have another kind of lesson learned is, we had our protocols and policies for quarantine and isolation, and now it's here, and things have been changing daily. And we actually just rolled out to families and students a quarantine and isolation guide that is really, really helpful. And so it allows everybody on the isolation team, but just within the community in general, to use this as a guide. So our messaging is consistent, from things of if a student decides that they want to go home to quarantine or isolate instead of staying on campus, if they do that, this is what it means to return. Because at first our messaging was maybe a little bit all over the place or just not consistent depending on who that message came from. So getting the folks together to work through the messaging and having this guide now has been really fabulous. So I'm happy to talk offline with anybody about isolation and quarantine. I think we're in a very good place with it right now. So I will let somebody else speak.
So in the spring, we found that, we met together and, 2 hours later, we had our first person that needed to go into isolation. So it was a lot of rallying. What do we do? And we found that, those students were reporting that they felt isolated, disconnected. We had folks Snapchatting, I'm in isolation, I need help, we had some stuff happening. And so when you think about it, they're moved into these empty rooms. They don't have any of their items. They're there 10 to 14 days. They're lonely. So that made sense. And so to revamp our process for the fall, we actually turned the process over to medical services, which was great because they are championing this process. It also helps with any HIPAA pieces and who needs to know folks' statuses. And they're working with multiple offices, including my own. But, they have on their website now, here's what you need to do if you self-isolate, if you have to quarantine. Here's what you put in your COVID bag. We've asked every student to have a COVID bag just in case you need to be relocated. We say it could be 10 days, and so really being open and transparent about the process has been helpful. In our halls where folks have been relocated, we've put bulletin boards up so it feels like a home away from home. It's not just this empty space that students are going to. They get food every day from dining. We make sure we check in on our dietary restrictions. And because of testing and the way it's moving, they're there less time, which is great. But it was really, really important for us to think about how do we make this feel like home and an experience versus an empty room for 10 to 14 days. And then also regular communication and checking in on how they're doing has been helpful so far.
I just want to reiterate this important need of, it's literally called isolation housing. And so we start off with the terminology that you're going to be isolated and alone. And so our process will begin with our health and wellness center and being able to connect with them. It's a balance, and I see a lot of questions about staff and kind of the anxiety that staff has had. We are trying to start this process all contactless, and so the health center will have a phone conversation, virtual conversation that will trigger our housing team to get all of our processes with check-in, but check-in is through a locker where they can go and pick up the keys and all the information. Our police department has volunteered to give them wireless access. So once the student gets to the building, they'll open the door and then they'll go in and then they'll make that process. So, you know, we're trying to balance the needs of supporting our students who are going in there and then supporting our staff who are quite frankly terrified, even though our health professionals are saying, as long as someone has a mask on and keep their distance, it's okay. But we know that our staff are very fearful of what's to come. We will be doing routine check-ins with the students that are in isolation. Just today, we pivoted where they're gonna, and my doctors are gonna kill me. It's a pulse sensation thing that will track how they're doing in isolation. So, you know, every day we are pivoting and learning more about what other universities are doing. But the very nature of being in quarantine and isolation is that they stay in place. And so we recognize it's going to be a challenge. We've given them a checklist of all the things to bring. And also we will have staff on deck if there's essential items that need to be retrieved to be able to help them. And, you know, this is not a perfect process, especially when we're trying to welcome people to the residential communities, and the first thing that they have to do is go into this. So we recognize that they're going to need that support, and we've alerted our students of concern team to ensure that they are aware of who's in the residential facilities, and also working with our mental health professionals on campus.
Thank you, Kawana, and thank you for that segue in the conversation about staff. And this will be, as we get close to our time here, this will be our last kind of question to topic to unpack. But, you know, our staff, both professional and student staff, and their role and their function. First, you know, what are you seeing, and perhaps what were you concerned or hopeful about in this, perhaps a new situation, new role, new practices that the staff is having to do. So that's the first part of the question. The second part is, you know, not just short-term impact, but long-term impact on this. What are you thinking about, and what have you already observed about your staff? And
I think, and I would love my colleagues who are open now, our staff are struggling. We've been in this since March. And, you know, it's not necessarily just all about reopening. We've had to furlough staff over the summer. And so just the impacts of what furlough means to your value as an employee has, you know, challenged us. And so our staff are struggling, and they haven't had the traditional time over the summer to plan for RAs to arrive, to plan their training. Now we definitely will get it done, but it's not been our traditional framework. And so, you know, we've got to own that they've had to hold a lot of the emotional labor of what it means to close in the spring and have RAs who are very upset about how the semester has ended. To not be able to see their seniors graduate. And so the world of student affairs, particular housing, has kind of been tossed aside, and we're now trying to rebuild trust, rebuild and start for the new year. So, you know, our team, you know, is struggling, and they're asking us questions and asking us about what does this mean financially for us if we don't open? What does this mean if the students are here, and how do we support them, and how do we respond to crisis? What does it mean to be a live-in staff now, and how are you going to support me and protect and assure that I'm okay? So many questions on a daily basis. You know, how we've approached the conversation is to allow space to ask those questions and be very transparent about the information we know, and also what we don't know, and bring in HR when needed to kind of clarify any of those things. Our live-in staff will have a hybrid model where we're really only asking them to respond in person for duty situations that arise, and also for move-in and key dates like that. But for the most part, they are working virtually. as our campus is still having students return, but most of this is going to be virtual and online. So it's really trying to provide space to answer questions that may come up and just acknowledge that, you know, this has not been easy for anybody at any level.
Yeah, I would tack on to that, Kawana. This has been, you know, I'll speak for myself, this has been really hard trying to lead through a pandemic and at times convince staff that you care and that you matter, you're valued, and we're going to open. That's a lot to hold, right? And so I just wanted to say that in this group, you know, the furlough piece is, you know, when you have folks who are saying, hey, how am I going to pay rent, right? Because I'm furloughed. And it's only 1 to 2 days a month, so I don't get unemployment. Like, these are real livelihood issues that folks are having, or how do I pay for childcare? So I think it's a lot for managers to hold, and I think it's important to continue to work with HR to get support and figure out how to help folks navigate those questions that pop up, or folks who are choosing between, do I stay in this job because I need the money, or do I quit because I have folks at home who are compromised and I have to think about their health? And so I think they're making some pretty tough decisions. So the furlough pieces, I think one of the interesting things we've had to navigate is, can hall directors work from home? That's really tricky when you already have a home and the job is to be live-in and be available to students. So we've had to navigate that piece. And folks who, you know, want us to make people wear a mask, or question why they don't have a mask on if there's an accommodation issue. And so those are some of the trickier things that I think have come up from staff that we're trying to navigate at this moment. But, you know, again, folks are just scared, right? And they want to know that they matter and they have options.
So I'll try to tackle the live-in professional staff and then talk a little bit about RAs as well in 2 minutes or so. So I think when you think about what can you do or actions to do to support a staff, I think the answer is in the question. It's support, and that looks different for everybody. So I think it's about continuing to get to know your team and how they need or like or want to be supported, because I think that looks different for people. You know, we use this word self-care, and some of us are probably hearing that a lot more, but you know, some people, if they hear that, that just might upset them a little bit more, right? Because self-care looks different for everybody and it's defined differently. And so I think as a leader, as a supervisor, as a manager, you need to navigate that for your team and know that that looks different for everybody. I think that that's important. I think effective communication, effective is the key word, right? Communication is so important in all that we do. But for right now, I think adding transparency to that. I have a staff of 5. They're community directors, live-in staff, and we communicate about everything, the good, bad, the ugly. You're upset, you need to vent, let's talk about it. So I think providing that space for it and being honest and transparent has really helped get us all through this. And going both ways, right? Like, they're fantastic and they provide opportunities for me to vent every now and then if I need to, right? And so we have that trust, and they work fabulously together. And I think that's an important piece of it, to kind of keep that motivation going. And the fact that, you know, people are still stepping up and taking initiative, I think speaks volumes, right, to work ethic and what they're doing. So, you know, because there's a lot of moving pieces right now with that communication, I have found that it's helpful just to CC them on things. Like, hey, this email is coming through. We don't necessarily have time to meet today. So they know, like, CC means like, read this, be in the know so you're looped in. And then we can talk about it at the next staff meeting. That has been really, really helpful. Asking them again kind of what they need. But I think as a supervisor, you need to have follow through on that, right? Don't ask if you're not gonna then close the loop on that. I think that that's really, really, really important for supervisors right now. And potentially hard, right? Because everybody's stressed out, everybody's overwhelmed, but as a supervisor, they're looking to you as a role model, as a leader, you know, and we're in crisis, right? So how are you showing up as a leader, as a supervisor in crisis to not only the live-in folks, but to the student staff as well? So let me just, for time purposes, let me just shift over and talk about the RAs real quickly. We have basically said to the RAs, we are not requiring you to do anything in person other than the rounds, right? Like, rounds, you got to do that in person. Unfortunately, we can't do that over Zoom. But all of the programming, even we have, we're trying to get a true curriculum model up and rolling. That's kind of paused a little bit now because of COVID. But so all of our programming and resident one-on-ones and all of those things will be done virtually. We've even gotten really innovative of thinking how we're going to do occupancy checks via Zoom. So we can potentially really have everything that we're asking them to do be virtually. So that way we're not putting them at risk because of being in this position. And so I think the communication and the transparency with the RAs goes a long way too. Of course, you can't necessarily share everything that's going on because of the confidentiality and things behind that, but I think they really appreciate being in the know as much as they can and having those one-on-one conversations with their supervisors. And I try to make myself available to them as much as I can, even during this time, which time is something that I think we all need more of. So if anybody has the trick to how to make that happen, let's have a webinar on that next. But I think the RAs, they just need support too, right? We need to see them. We need to know that they're there and that they're doing such important work. And that, residents are coming to them with so many other things that they would if this was a normal fall.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you all the panelists. I know would love to stay more time, continue the conversation, continue the dialogue, but we've reached our time. But I do appreciate you all taking the time to be here and share the experiences and concepts that you were continue to think about, not just for students, but also for the staff. As we begin to close out, please know that we plan to continue to offer more senior housing officer roundtable and learning opportunities in the coming weeks. So please stay tuned for messaging promotion on that from Kauai. I also want to highlight, in case you've missed this, the association recently released a resource guide, a transferable skills resource to assist staff, especially SHOs, in advocating for the repositioning and repurposing of their, especially live-in staff, and help those staff members with language that illustrates and informs on their value to the campus community, as that may be impacting your campus perhaps. If you've pivoted to full online and now you're working with your team to reposition them. So this was sent last week via an all-member message to staff. It was sent also this week again, and it was shared via social media. So please check that resource. Perhaps even if you don't need it at this moment, it's a very good resource. And very beneficial to our colleagues. So once again, thank you all thank you to all the panelists for the contributions. And to close out, I'm going to pass it back to Spencer. Thank you.
Alrighty, everyone, thank you again for your time and attendance today. This has been a recorded session, so if there's something that you heard you'd like to share with a friend or a colleague, this will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. Wish you all the best and stay well. Have a great day.